Hi guys. Tonight we're standing beneath a wide western sky, where darkness settles slowly across a settlement, still deciding what kind of town it wishes to become. The year is somewhere in the restless 1850s, and the streets beneath your boots are hardly streets at all. They are tracks of dust, wagon ruts, scattered boards, horse manure, and mud whenever the weather turns against everyone. Lantern light leaks through saloon windows, while horses breathe softly beside wooden hitching rails. Somewhere nearby, a hammer strikes unfinished timber, because another building must apparently appear before sunrise. This is the American frontier growing faster than its institutions can comfortably follow. And somewhere among these buildings, one person carries a badge that represents something surprisingly ambitious. The community expects law to function here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and while the lamps are still glowing. Tell us where you are listening from tonight. Share your location and local time. Whether morning is approaching or midnight has already passed. Now, dim the lights. You move deeper into the settlement as the noise becomes softer behind closed wooden doors. The sheriff of this world is not yet the polished Western hero later films will make familiar. His authority grows from older American traditions of county government, adapted awkwardly to communities spreading across enormous Western distances. Sheriffs already exist throughout the United States. Long before Western cattle towns become legendary, their office descends through English legal tradition into colonial government and then American county administration. By the 1850s, Western communities inherit that institution while facing conditions older counties rarely encounter at comparable scale. California demonstrates the pressure particularly clearly after the discovery of gold in 1848. Population surges transform remote places into crowded settlements filled with miners, merchants, laborers, gamblers, families, and opportunists. You can almost hear the confusion. A camp that contains a few tents. One season may contain stores and boarding houses soon afterward. Property claims overlap. Debts accumulate. Horses disappear. Arguments become lawsuits. And violence occasionally turns private grievances into public emergencies. Formal government often arrives unevenly. California becomes a state in 1850, establishing counties and local offices within a rapidly changing society. Sheriffs become important county officials, but their responsibilities extend far beyond dramatic pursuits of armed fugitives. Historical records show sheriffs serving court documents, managing prisoners, collecting certain taxes or fees, and carrying out judicial orders. They may supervise elections or perform additional county duties, depending upon local law and period. That reality matters, because frontier law enforcement is usually administrative before it becomes cinematic. Much of the sheriff's day can involve paperwork, waiting, travel, and conversations that never become gunfights. A surviving county record can reveal more about frontier government than a famous duel ever could. Historians working with Western archives have repeatedly shown how institutions developed alongside migration, commerce, transportation, and changing patterns of settlement. University collections at Stanford and the University of California preserve extensive materials documenting 19th century Western life and government. Such archives help modern historians reconstruct a frontier where law is neither completely absent nor comfortably established. The old phrase, "lawless West," therefore needs careful handling. You certainly encounter violence, weak institutions, corruption, and communities where official authority remains dangerously thin. Yet you also find courts, elected officials, legal petitions, property records, juries, and citizens determined to make government function. The contradiction follows you everywhere. Imagine riding beyond town, with cold iron resting against your side and wet leather creaking beneath you. Your jurisdiction may stretch across country where settlements stand many miles apart, connected by rough roads, vulnerable to weather and seasonal damage. There is no radio waiting. A message travels at the speed of a horse, stagecoach, railway connection, or telegraph line where one exists. A sheriff searching for a suspect may depend upon descriptions passed between strangers, local memory, and information gathered at ranches or roadside stations. Even the meaning of authority can become uncertain beyond settled streets. County boundaries may be clear on paper while mountains, deserts, rivers, and distance make enforcement something else entirely. Here historians still debate how best to describe the balance between formal law and community enforcement across different frontier regions. Evidence varies sharply by territory, decade, population, and local political culture, making simple conclusions difficult to defend. Research associated with major universities, including Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, and the University of Chicago, has helped broaden Western history beyond heroic biography. Modern scholarship increasingly examines institutions, communities, indigenous peoples, migration, labor, race, gender, economics, and environmental pressures together. That wider view changes the sheriff standing before you. He is not simply a lone man protecting civilization from chaos. He belongs to a network containing judges, clerks, marshals, constables, deputies, jailers, military authorities, territorial officials, and ordinary residents. Sometimes those relationships cooperate smoothly. Sometimes they absolutely do not. Local politics can shape who receives office and how effectively that person performs it. A sheriff may be respected by one group and distrusted by another, especially where elections, land claims, mining interests, or ethnic tensions divide communities. Some officers prove capable and courageous. Others are ineffective, partisan, corrupt, inexperienced, or simply overwhelmed by responsibilities larger than their available resources. The badge itself cannot create authority. Authority depends upon people recognizing the office, courts supporting its actions, and communities providing enough cooperation for enforcement to become practical. When those conditions weaken, a sheriff may discover that polished metal offers very little protection. Your mind drifts toward a small county jail after midnight. Wood smoke hangs in the air. A tired deputy rubs frozen fingers near a stove, and a prisoner shifts behind a heavy door. Outside, the town seems peaceful. That quiet is part of the story too. Most frontier nights do not end with famous gunfire. Most disputes disappear into forgotten records. Ordinary arrests, negotiated settlements, dismissed complaints, and exhausted silence. Yet the population keeps moving westward, and settlements keep becoming towns. Roads lengthen. Commerce expands. County governments strengthen, and expectations surrounding the sheriff grow with them. The office is becoming more visible precisely because Western society is becoming more complicated. Soon gold camps, territorial conflicts, war, railroads, cattle drives, political rivalries, and notorious fugitives will test that authority repeatedly. For now, however, you remain beside the rough courthouse, listening as hoarse breath rises into the cold night. A badge catches the lantern light. Behind it stands an institution, still learning how to survive the frontier. That institution becomes clearer when you follow the sheriff through an ordinary working day. Dawn spreads across the county seat, touching rooftops, hitching rails, and the muddy road outside the courthouse. Inside, paper waits. That may be the first surprise. The Western sheriff is remembered with a revolver, but his working life often begins with documents, warrants, court orders, notices, tax records, prisoner lists, and correspondence can demand attention before anyone reaches for a saddle. You hear boots crossing wooden floorboards while a clerk sorts papers nearby. Ink dries slowly beside a window, and yesterday's wood smoke still hangs faintly beneath the ceiling. The badge represents an office, not merely a weapon. Across many Western counties, sheriffs are elected officials responsible to local voters and county government. Exact duties differ according to state or territorial law, local custom, and the changing structure of government. One sheriff might serve legal papers before riding miles to make an arrest. Another might supervise prisoners, organize deputies, assist courts, collect taxes, or arrange transportation for defendants. Modern historical scholarship, preserved through institutions such as Stanford University and the University of California, helps reveal this broader administrative world. County records show that frontier government depends upon routine work as much as dramatic enforcement. You begin with a warrant. A judge or court provides legal authority, but the paper itself cannot ride across the county. Someone must locate the person named there, explain the arrest, manage resistance if it comes, and return the prisoner safely. That someone may be the sheriff. The distance alone can turn a simple task into an expedition. Your horse needs water, food, rest, and dependable footing, while weather can transform familiar trails within hours. Wet leather presses against your coat as rain darkens the road. Mud gathers beneath the horse, slowing every mile, and the courthouse disappears behind low hills. There is no dramatic music. There is mostly weather. When you finally reach a ranch, mining camp, or isolated settlement, the suspect may already be gone. Information travels unevenly, and several days can separate an offense from the sheriff's arrival. Local knowledge becomes essential. A blacksmith remembers which horse passed yesterday. A boarding house owner recalls a traveler leaving before sunrise. A ranch worker quietly mentions a trail leading toward another county. These small conversations create the practical machinery of pursuit. Yet arresting someone is only part of the responsibility. The sheriff must also keep prisoners secure, and frontier jails vary enormously in construction, safety, and comfort. Some communities use purpose-built facilities with stone or brick walls. Others rely upon simpler structures that provide far less confidence to everyone involved. You approach one such jail near evening. Cold iron touches your palm as you inspect a lock. Inside, a prisoner receives food, while another complains about blankets, damp walls, or the endless boredom of confinement. Human details survive beneath the legend. The sheriff must consider meals, guards, escape risks, illness, court schedules, and transportation. A prisoner may need moving across difficult country to reach a courthouse or more secure facility. Then there are taxes. In several 19th century jurisdictions, sheriffs perform financial duties that modern audiences rarely associate with law enforcement. Collecting taxes or fees can place the officer directly inside the economic life of the county. People are not always delighted to see him. A farmer, facing a poor harvest, may resent a demand for payment. A merchant may dispute an assessment, while a property owner questions whether local government deserves another dollar. The sheriff therefore represents both protection and obligation. This dual role explains why local reputation matters so much. He needs enough authority to enforce decisions, but enough trust to work among neighbors he may encounter repeatedly. Historians still debate how much personal reputation mattered compared with formal institutions in different Western communities. Some places relied heavily upon individual relationships, while others developed stronger courts and administrative systems surprisingly early. Researchers at universities, including Yale, Princeton, Columbia, and the University of Chicago have contributed to wider interpretations of American state formation. Their scholarship encourages you to see frontier authority as a changing relationship between institutions and communities. That relationship becomes especially visible when danger exceeds one officer's capacity. A sheriff may appoint deputies or call upon local citizens to assist with particular duties. The famous posse emerges from older legal traditions rather than appearing suddenly beneath Western sunsets. Imagine the practical problem. 3 suspected horse thieves leave town together, while the sheriff has one tired deputy and an enormous county. He needs riders who know trails, water sources, ranches, crossings, and neighboring settlements. The community becomes part of enforcement. That cooperation can strengthen authority, but it can also create complications. Personal grudges, political loyalties, and local friendships may influence who volunteers and whom residents protect. Formal law does not erase human relationships, nor does carrying a firearm make every confrontation violent. Many arrests occur through surprise, negotiation, surrender, or simple recognition that resisting will create greater trouble. The sheriff who avoids unnecessary violence may be doing his job more effectively than one seeking confrontation. Popular memory tends to reverse that logic. Later entertainment celebrates the moment when weapons leave holsters. Historical records more often reveal waiting, serving papers, guarding doors, questioning witnesses, collecting fees, and traveling long distances between scattered responsibilities. You've returned to the courthouse after sunset. Your coat smells of horse sweat and damp wool. A lamp burns beside unfinished paperwork. While cold soup waits somewhere behind the office, the sheriff removes his hat. Tomorrow may bring a robbery report, an escaped prisoner, an election dispute, or nothing more exciting than another court summons. He cannot know which version of the frontier morning will deliver. That uncertainty defines the office. Behind every famous badge lies a county that must somehow function. Roads require administration. Courts require enforcement. Prisoners require custody. And citizens expect disputes to end somewhere beyond personal revenge. The sheriff stands inside that fragile expectation. Soon, in the gold towns, that expectation will face extraordinary pressure. Population will outrun buildings. Wealth will attract opportunity and crime. And communities will sometimes decide official law is moving far too slowly. That pressure becomes impossible to ignore as you enter the mining settlements of the 1850s. The road narrows between canvas shelters, rough timber buildings, stacked supplies, tethered animals, and men carrying tools toward distant claims. Everything seems temporary. Yet everyone behaves as though fortune might arrive tomorrow. Dust settles on your coat during dry months, while winter rain turns pathways into deep brown mud. Wet boots scrape across saloon floors. Cooking smoke drifts between cabins, and metal tools ring from dawn until darkness. Gold has changed the rhythm of Western settlement. After the California discoveries, beginning in 1848, migration accelerates with astonishing speed. People arrive from across the United States and many parts of the wider world, creating communities faster than stable institutions can develop. You see merchants opening stores beside unfinished roads. Boarding houses fill quickly. Mining claims multiply. Property changes hands, and disputes emerge wherever sudden wealth meets uncertain expectations. A sheriff entering this environment faces more than ordinary crime. He enters a society being assembled around him. California achieves statehood in 1850, and counties provide an important framework for government. Sheriffs operate within this growing legal structure alongside judges, constables, clerks, and other officials. Research preserved by the University of California has helped historians reconstruct this complicated transformation. Archival collections reveal communities building courts and local government, while mining expansion continues around them at remarkable speed. The popular image of complete lawlessness becomes harder to maintain when you examine those records. Miners create rules concerning claims. Citizens petition officials. Juries hear cases. Courts resolve disputes. And county governments attempt to collect revenue and enforce legal decisions. Still, the system can be fragile. A courthouse may exist without enough personnel. A sheriff may hold legitimate authority while lacking deputies. Secure jail space, reliable transportation, or public support. Distance remains relentless. Suppose a complaint reaches you from a mining camp beyond a steep ridge. A mule has disappeared. Two men accuse each other of theft, and witnesses disagree about nearly everything. You read it toward them beneath a pale afternoon sky. Your saddle creaks. Loose stones shift beneath the horse. and cold air carries the smell of pine from higher ground. By arrival, anger has already enjoyed several hours to mature. Now comes the difficult part. You must determine whether a crime occurred, whether evidence exists, and whether anyone will cooperate. The badge cannot magically reveal truth. Witnesses may remember events differently. Friends defend friends. Business partners protect investments. And newcomers sometimes disappear before questions can reach them. Mining disputes can become especially sensitive because claims represent hopes as much as property. A narrow patch of earth might contain a man's savings, labor, debt, and imagined future. One boundary marker moved during darkness can create enormous suspicion. Sheriffs therefore operate inside an economy where uncertainty itself has value. They enforce decisions while communities argue about ownership. Contracts, debts, theft, and access to resources. Then, another force appears beside formal government. Vigilantism. In several Western communities, citizens organize outside normal legal procedures when they believe established institutions are ineffective or corrupt. San Francisco's vigilance committees of 1851 and 1856 become especially famous examples. Their actions remain deeply controversial. Supporters at the time present such movements as necessary responses to crime and political corruption. Critics view them as dangerous challenges to courts, due process, and legitimate government. Modern historians continue debating their motives. Social composition, political influence, and long-term meaning. Scholarship connected with Stanford, Yale, Harvard, and other major universities has examined vigilantism within broader struggles over power and community authority. There is no comfortable answer for a sheriff. However, the immediate problem is painfully practical. What happens when citizens claim they are enforcing justice while bypassing the legal system you represent? You can feel the tension outside a crowded building. Boots shift against wooden boards. Voices remain low. But everyone understands that a prisoner inside has become the center of competing ideas about justice. One side wants courts. Another wants immediate action. The sheriff may possess legal responsibility for the prisoner while lacking enough force to resist a determined crowd. His decision can affect his reputation, career, safety, and perhaps the future authority of his office. Such moments reveal something important about frontier law. Government is not simply created by writing statutes. It becomes real only when institutions can enforce decisions and communities broadly accept their legitimacy. That legitimacy grows unevenly across the mining frontier. Harvard and Princeton scholarship on 19th-century American political development offers useful context for understanding this process. Expanding states and territories must convert legal structures on paper into institutions functioning across rapidly changing populations. The mining West makes that challenge unusually visible, and violence, while real, should not swallow the entire picture. Most miners are not spending each evening arranging famous gunfights. They work, eat, sleep, trade, gamble, write letters, become sick, lose money, make money, and complain about prices. A sheriff sees these ordinary lives closely. Perhaps a young miner enters the office because his tools were stolen. His hands remain cracked from cold water, and embarrassment appears before anger, because replacing them may cost more than he can spare. Another resident reports a missing horse. A merchant wants payment from a debtor. A family asks whether an intoxicated neighbor can be kept away overnight. These cases rarely survive in legend. Yet they show why communities need law enforcement. Your emotional view of the mining town begins to change. At first, it seems chaotic and almost theatrical, filled with noise, money, movement, and sudden possibility. Now you notice fatigue. You hear coughing behind thin walls. You smell damp wool drying near a stove. And you see a sheriff rubbing tired eyes over another document. Prosperity produces administration. So does disappointment. As mining settlements mature, some temporary camps vanish while others become established towns. Better roads appear. Permanent buildings rise. Courts strengthen. Newspapers grow influential. And local politics become increasingly organized. The sheriff changes with them. He remains vulnerable to corruption, incompetence, political pressure, and simple human error. Yet his office becomes part of a larger expectation that disputes should move toward courts rather than private retaliation. That expectation will soon face an even greater strain. Across the country, political conflict is deepening. Questions of slavery, territorial power, federal authority, and national identity are dividing Americans with increasing bitterness. The frontier cannot remain outside that struggle. As the 1850s fade, the badge you have followed through mining camps will enter a decade shaped by civil war, divided loyalties, and uncertain authority. The uncertainty follows you into the early 1860s, when political disagreement becomes something heavier than argument. Across the frontier, news arrives through newspapers, letters, stage routes, military dispatches, and telegraph lines that continue spreading across the continent. Then the country divides. The American Civil War begins in 1861, and Western communities experience the conflict in ways that differ sharply from the enormous battles farther east. The West is not one uniform region, and loyalties vary between territories, counties, settlements, and sometimes neighbors. For the sheriff, this changes everything. You still have warrants waiting on a desk. Prisoners still need guarding. Taxes still require attention, and stolen livestock remains stubbornly important to whoever owns it. Yet ordinary duties now exist beneath national crisis. In California, loyalty to the Union remains dominant politically, although Confederate sympathizers certainly exist. Gold and other Western resources also matter to the Union economy, making security and transportation increasingly significant. Farther east, territorial conflict becomes more immediate. New Mexico Territory experiences military campaigning, including the Confederate invasion of 1862. Federal troops, territorial forces, local officials, and civilian communities operate within overlapping systems of authority. You can imagine how confusing this becomes. A sheriff carries authority from county or territorial law, but military commanders possess responsibilities connected to wartime security. Federal marshals operate within another sphere, while local officers continue handling ordinary criminal matters. Jurisdictions overlap, responsibilities blur. Historical records, preserved by institutions, including Stanford University and the University of California, show how Western communities remain connected to national political developments. The war reaches beyond battlefields through economics, migration, military mobilization, and political allegiance. The frontier sheriff cannot simply ignore these forces. You read through a settlement one cold morning and notice fewer familiar faces. Some men have joined military units, while others have moved elsewhere for work, safety, or political reasons. Businesses feel the disruption. Families wait for letters, horse prices, transportation, supplies, and local labor can all be affected by wartime demands, even where armies remain distant. The conflict enters daily life through absence and uncertainty. The sheriff must operate within that atmosphere. Suppose a stranger arrives, carrying suspicious papers and offering contradictory explanations about his journey before the war. Perhaps he attracts curiosity. Now he attracts questions. Is he a deserter, fugitive, criminal, political messenger, or simply a tired traveler who chose an unfortunate week to visit? Evidence still matters, but fear changes how people interpret evidence. A rumor can cross a small town faster than any official investigation. Someone claims weapons are hidden outside town. Another person reports secret meetings, and suddenly, every unfamiliar horse becomes part of a conspiracy. The sheriff must decide what deserves attention. Modern historians still debate how deeply wartime political identities shaped local violence in different Western regions. Surviving records reveal enormous variation. And later memories sometimes simplify loyalties that were complicated during the conflict itself. Research associated with Yale, Princeton, Columbia, and the University of Chicago has helped historians examine the Civil War as a continental struggle. This wider approach places Western territories within questions of expansion. Federal power, race, resources, and political authority. For you, however, history feels smaller. It sounds like boots outside the jail after midnight. A prisoner sits behind a locked door, accused of an offense that may now carry political meaning. Several residents believe he deserves immediate punishment, while others insist the evidence is weak. You stand between them. The iron key feels cold. Nobody looks sleepy. In such moments, the sheriff's responsibility is not to embody one community faction. Ideally, he preserves legal custody until courts determine what follows. Reality can be less orderly. Sheriffs are political human beings, living among communities divided by the same loyalties affecting everyone else. Some officers act impartially, while others become associated with factions, parties, or local interests. The badge does not remove conviction, nor does war suspend crime. Horse theft remains particularly serious because horses are transportation, labor, property, and sometimes survival. Losing one in an isolated region can mean losing the ability to work or travel. Robbery continues, assault continues, property disputes continue. And now weapons circulate through communities shaped by military activity and returning volunteers. A sheriff pursuing suspects may still depend upon deputies and local riders. But wartime division can make assembling assistance more difficult when residents distrust one another. Who joins the posse? Who refuses? Who quietly warns the suspect before you arrive? Community cooperation, always essential, becomes tangled with allegiance. You feel this while crossing open country beneath a hard afternoon wind. Dust works beneath your collar, and your horse breathes heavily after climbing a long rise. Ahead lies a ranch where a wanted man may be hiding. Behind you ride several citizens. You trust most of them, probably. That small uncertainty captures something larger about wartime frontier authority. Law enforcement depends upon relationships precisely when national events are placing those relationships under unusual strain. Military authority creates another complication. In places affected directly by campaigns or threats, soldiers may arrest civilians, guard transportation routes, protect installations, or pursue armed groups. Civil authorities must work beside institutions built for war rather than ordinary justice. The distinction matters. A sheriff answers to civilian law. A military officer operates through a command structure designed around different priorities. Sometimes they cooperate effectively. Sometimes conflict emerges over prisoners, evidence, jurisdiction, or urgency. Archival evidence from Western territories shows that government during the Civil War cannot be understood through one simple chain of authority. Federal, territorial, military, county, and municipal systems can exist simultaneously, and beneath them are indigenous nations with their own political systems, interests, and conflicts. Western expansion has already produced profound pressure upon native communities before the Civil War. Wartime demands and military campaigns intensify instability in several regions, with consequences extending far beyond the sheriff's ordinary responsibilities. A county officer might encounter displaced families, disrupted trade, frightened settlers, military patrols, and rumors of violence within the same week. The emotional landscape changes. Earlier mining towns felt restless with expectation. Wartime settlements often carry another sensation, the quiet awareness that events elsewhere may suddenly alter life here. You hear distant bells announcing news. People gather around newspapers. Someone reads names aloud. Then everyone returns to work because animals still require feeding. Roofs still leak, and courts still open. The sheriff returns as well. His coat smells of rain-soaked canvas after another miserable ride. Mud dries across his boots while paperwork waits beneath a lamp. There is something almost absurd about bureaucracy surviving national catastrophe, yet that survival matters. Every warrant served and prisoner delivered represents the continuation of civilian institutions during a period when violence threatens to overwhelm them. By 1865, the Civil War ends. But the frontier does not simply return to its earlier condition. Veterans come west. Transportation expands. Political struggles continue, and new communities grow across territories undergoing rapid change. The badge survives the war. Now, it enters a West filled with returning soldiers, expanding settlement, contested authority, and expectations that government should become stronger than before. The war ends. But peace does not arrive everywhere at the same speed. You move into the later 1860s beneath a sky crossed by telegraph wires, wagon routes, and the smoke of locomotives pushing farther west. Returning veterans appear in growing settlements, carrying different experiences and uncertain plans. Some seek land, some seek employment, and others simply want distance from memories they rarely describe. The sheriff meets them all. His county may be larger now, its population more mobile, and its politics more complicated. The wartime emergency has ended. Yet questions of authority remain woven through ordinary life. A courthouse door opens early. Inside, boots leave dried mud across the floor while a clerk unfolds documents beneath weak morning light. The sheriff studies warrants, property notices, court orders, and correspondence arriving from officials elsewhere. Government is becoming harder to avoid. Across the post-war West, migration accelerates alongside railroad construction, agricultural expansion, mining development, and the creation of new communities. Federal policies encourage settlement, while territorial governments struggle to administer populations spread across immense distances. One mainstream fact becomes especially important here. The Homestead Act of 1862 continues shaping Western settlement after the war, by offering eligible claimants access to federal land under specific conditions. The act does not create a simple march of peaceful farms across empty country. The land is not empty. Indigenous nations already inhabit, govern, and understand these landscapes through relationships extending far beyond American property lines. Expansion therefore creates conflict alongside opportunity. Modern scholarship at Stanford University, Yale University, and the University of California has emphasized this larger context. Western settlement involves federal policy, native sovereignty, migration, environmental change, business interests, and local government operating together. The sheriff stands somewhere inside this enormous process. He's not directing national expansion. He's handling what arrives afterward. A settler claims another man moved a fence. A rancher reports missing livestock. Two neighbors disagree over water access, while a merchant demands enforcement of a court judgment. Property becomes personal very quickly. You feel that tension beside a rough boundary marker hammered into dry earth. Wind carries dust across your boots while two families watch from opposite sides of a disputed line. Nobody wants philosophy. They want an answer. The sheriff may serve legal papers connected to such disputes, but courts determine the underlying legal questions. His task is often to enforce decisions rather than invent them. That distinction sounds simple inside a law book. It becomes less comfortable when everyone involved knows your name. Sheriffs are frequently local figures living among the people affected by their actions. They may share churches, businesses, friendships, political affiliations, or family connections with residents. Impartiality can therefore become difficult to demonstrate, even when an officer attempts it sincerely. Elections sharpen the problem. The sheriff's office can be politically valuable because it carries authority, visibility, patronage, and practical influence. Candidates may depend upon party organizations or local alliances to win office. A badge can become part of politics. Historians still debate how strongly partisan networks shaped law enforcement across different Western counties during Reconstruction and the following decades. Conditions varied widely. and evidence from one territory cannot safely describe another. Research connected with Princeton University, Columbia University, and the University of Chicago has explored how American institutions expanded during this period. Such work helps explain why local government developed through negotiation, rather than through one smooth national pattern. The frontier refuses neatness. Territories become states at different moments. Counties divide as populations change, and new towns compete to become commercial or administrative centers. Officials work with imperfect information. Records travel slowly. Courts may sit only at certain times, leaving prisoners waiting in disputes unresolved longer than anyone prefers. You hear the consequence inside a jail. A man shifts on a wooden bunk while rain taps against the roof. Damp wool, old straw, wood smoke, and unwashed clothing create an atmosphere no Western film seems eager to preserve. He asks when the judge is coming. The sheriff cannot provide certainty. Perhaps transportation has been delayed. Perhaps the court calendar has changed, or another case has consumed the available time. Custody continues anyway. The sheriff must keep prisoners alive, reasonably secure, and available for legal proceedings. Escape is embarrassing, politically damaging, and occasionally dangerous for the surrounding community. Jails improve in some growing counties. More permanent courthouses and stronger facilities appear as settlements, accumulate tax revenue and political importance. Yet development remains uneven, especially in newer or poorer districts. The same unevenness affects communication. The transcontinental telegraph has connected Eastern and Western networks since 1861, dramatically improving long-distance communication. After the war, expanding telegraph and railroad systems increasingly alter how information moves across the West. For sheriffs, speed changes possibilities. Descriptions of fugitives can travel farther before the suspect does. Officials can communicate across distances that once required days of riding. But technology has limits. A telegraph line does not reach every ranch, mining camp, canyon, or mountain settlement. The final miles may still belong to a horse and a tired rider. You know this as evening falls. Your fingers tighten around reins cooled by the wind. The road has become a pale strip beneath gathering darkness. And somewhere ahead, a deputy waits with news about stolen cattle. Horse breath drifts into the air. The landscape remains enormous. Behind that physical distance lies another post-war challenge. Large numbers of former soldiers move through civilian society, carrying skills that can be useful to law enforcement or criminal activity. Military experience does not automatically make anyone violent or lawless. Many veterans become farmers, merchants, laborers, officials, and family men. Still, familiarity with horses, firearms, organization, and hardship can shape frontier life. Some veterans themselves become law officers. A sheriff who has served during the war may bring discipline and confidence into office. But military habits do not always fit civilian policing. Civil law requires restraint. The suspect is not an enemy soldier. That principle becomes increasingly important as formal institutions strengthen. Arrest, evidence, custody, hearings, and trials are meant to replace personal vengeance. Yet communities sometimes remain impatient. When courts seem slow or crime appears persistent, citizens may still support vigilante action. Sheriffs can find themselves caught between public demands for immediate punishment and legal procedures requiring delay. You stand again before a crowd. This time, nobody shouts. That makes it worse. Faces glow beneath lantern light while wet coats drip onto wooden boards. Somewhere behind you, a prisoner waits inside a locked room. The sheriff must decide whether his community will support the law when supporting it becomes inconvenient. That question has no universal answer. Some sheriffs maintain custody through negotiation or determined resistance. Others face overwhelming pressure, while some officers themselves sympathize with extra-legal action. Historical records reveal all these possibilities. The emotional transition of the post-war frontier lies here. Uncertainty is slowly becoming structure, but structure brings expectations that expose every weakness more clearly. People expect better roads. They expect functioning courts. They expect elections, records, secure jails, and officers capable of enforcing decisions across growing counties. The sheriff's burden expands with those expectations. By the end of the 1860s, another transformation is approaching. Steel rails are crossing distances once measured almost entirely by hoofbeats and wagon wheels. The railroad will create new towns almost overnight. Cattle will arrive by the thousands, workers by the trainload, and money with extraordinary speed. The sheriff will follow, and the quiet courthouse will soon hear the restless noise of the cattle town. The rails arrive with a sound the older frontier never quite knew. Iron wheels grind against steel. Steam drifts across open ground, and a locomotive whistle carries farther than conversation ever could. You stand near a platform where everything seems to be moving. Workers unload crates beside stacked lumber. Merchants shout instructions. Horses pull wagons through churned earth. And newcomers step from passenger cars carrying trunks, blankets, tools, and uncertain expectations. Beyond them waits another moving world. Cattle after the Civil War. The cattle industry expands dramatically across parts of the West. Large herds move north from Texas toward railheads where animals can be shipped to eastern markets. The railroad changes geography. A town connected to eastern markets can grow with remarkable speed. Hotels, stores, blacksmith shops, restaurants, saloons, gambling rooms, livestock businesses, and freight operations gather around the commercial opportunity. Abilene, Kansas, becomes an important early cattle shipping center during the late 1860s. Other Kansas towns later take prominent roles as cattle routes and railroad connections shift. For law officers, growth creates work. The sheriff enters communities where permanent residents live beside thousands of temporary visitors. Cowboys arrive after long cattle drives carrying wages and an understandable appetite for food, drink, entertainment, and sleep. Mostly in that order. You smell the town before you understand it. Dust mixes with livestock, wood smoke, sweat, cooking grease, wet leather, and the unmistakable presence of many animals occupying limited ground. The streets are noisy even before evening. Cattle low near holding areas. Wagon wheels strike ruts. Hammers ring from new construction, and saloon music escapes through doors that rarely remain closed for long. University of Kansas Historical Collections, together with Western archives preserved at Stanford University and other research institutions, document the growth of these cattle communities. The evidence shows commercial towns rather than permanent theaters of gunfire. That distinction matters. The classic cattle town occupies a huge place in Western mythology. But its famous violent reputation has often been exaggerated by later entertainment. Violence certainly occurs. So do theft, gambling disputes, intoxicated arguments, assaults, and occasional killings. Yet thousands of people conduct ordinary business without becoming participants in legendary confrontations. A sheriff has to protect that ordinary world. You follow him down a boardwalk near sunset. His boots strike uneven planks, while merchants begin closing shops and saloons prepare for their busiest hours. A hotel owner complains about broken furniture. A stable keeper reports a missing saddle. Someone else insists two men are preparing to fight behind a saloon. None of these problems deserves a heroic soundtrack. They still require attention. The sheriff is not always the officer handling every town disturbance. Municipal marshals, constables, police officers, deputies, and county sheriffs may possess different responsibilities depending upon the place and period. Popular culture often blends these positions together. Historical government does not. A town marshal generally serves municipal authority, while the county sheriff operates across a larger jurisdiction. Their duties can overlap, and cooperation becomes necessary when suspects move beyond town boundaries. Modern historians at institutions, including Yale University and the University of Chicago, have emphasized the importance of distinguishing Western mythology from local administrative history. Examining actual offices reveals a more organized world than later fiction suggests. Still, organization does not guarantee calm. Night settles. Lanterns appear along the street, illuminating dust suspended in warm air. Inside a crowded saloon, damp shirts and tobacco smoke thicken the atmosphere while glasses strike wooden tables. A cowboy has been riding for weeks. He has slept beneath rain-soaked canvas, eaten repetitive meals, crossed difficult rivers, watched cattle through miserable nights, and endured dust in places dust should never reach. Now he has money. You can probably see the administrative challenge developing. Most visiting cowboys cause no serious trouble, but concentrated drinking and gambling can create disputes quickly. Local authorities sometimes adopt regulations intended to reduce the risk. Weapons restrictions become part of this effort in several Western towns. Visitors may be expected to surrender firearms upon entering particular areas or comply with local rules governing weapon possession. Such regulations challenge the modern image of an unrestricted armed frontier. Historical evidence shows considerable local variation. Some towns enforce weapons ordinances more consistently than others. Enforcement may change with officials, political pressure, economic interests, and the practical ability to make visitors obey. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these regulations and the broader level of violence within cattle towns. Surviving records are incomplete, and comparisons can become misleading when definitions and population estimates differ. Research from Harvard University, Princeton University, and Stanford University has contributed to broader studies of violence and institutional development in American history. Such scholarship encourages caution before turning colorful anecdotes into universal conclusions. The sheriff cannot work from averages anyway. He deals with tonight. A saloon door opens abruptly. Two men step outside, while a third remains behind them, shouting about a card game. The sheriff watches hands, posture, distance, and the reactions of everyone nearby. His best outcome is boring. He speaks calmly. A deputy moves closer. One man walks away. Nobody fires. The moment disappears from history. That disappearance explains why Western violence can become distorted in popular memory. Peaceful interventions rarely become newspaper legends, memoir highlights, or dramatic scenes. A shooting does. Successful law enforcement therefore leaves a strange archive. The sheriff's most effective moments may be precisely those that produce nothing memorable. You continue toward the railway district. Here the problems change. Freight attracts theft because valuable goods gather in predictable places. Livestock markets create opportunities for fraud, while transient populations make identification difficult. A stranger can arrive in the morning and leave by train that evening. The railroad helps law enforcement communicate and travel, but it helps suspects move as well. Technology cuts both ways. Telegraph offices become increasingly useful for sending descriptions and warnings. A sheriff can alert another jurisdiction before beginning a long pursuit. That is genuine progress. Yet a fugitive who reaches a train may cover distance with a speed impossible for a mounted posse to match. The old frontier is shrinking geographically while becoming faster socially. You feel that change beside the tracks. A locomotive waits under the evening sky, releasing steam in slow breaths. Its iron surfaces hold the day's fading warmth while nearby cattle shift behind wooden fencing. The sheriff stands between two Americas. Behind him lies a world of isolated settlements connected by horses, stage routes, and personal memory. Before him rises a network of railways, telegraphs, commercial markets, and rapidly expanding towns. His office must adapt. More people mean more court papers. More businesses mean more property disputes. More transportation means more strangers. More money means more opportunities for theft and fraud. The sheriff's work becomes increasingly connected to economic growth rather than simply frontier survival. That growth also creates political pressure. Business owners want order because disorder threatens customers and investment. Railroad companies value reliable shipping centers, while residents want streets where families can move without fear. Even saloon owners may prefer predictable peace. Broken furniture costs money. So the sheriff becomes part of the commercial machinery of the cattle town. His authority protects property, supports courts, and helps create the stability required for business. The heroic badge begins to look surprisingly practical. You turn away from the railway as darkness deepens. Music drifts from the saloons. Horse breath warms the cool air. And somewhere a tired cowboy removes his boots after weeks on the trail. Tomorrow, thousands of cattle may move toward waiting rail cars. Tonight, the sheriff watches the streets. Soon those cowboys, carrying wages, weapons, pride, exhaustion, and very human tempers, will meet the town's rules directly. The famous confrontation between cowboy freedom and Western law is waiting just beyond the lantern light. The confrontation waiting beyond that lantern light is usually quieter than legend suggests. You walk farther into the cattle town while music escapes through open doors and boot heels strike dusty boards. A group of cowboys approaches from the railway district. Their clothes carry the journey with them. Dust clings to trousers. Sweat has dried into shirts. And leather boots show weeks of hard riding. They have reached town alive. That alone feels worth celebrating. The cattle drive has demanded long days, interrupted sleep, difficult river crossings, unpredictable weather, and constant attention to animals capable of turning confusion into disaster. Now wages sit inside pockets. The town offers baths, meals, gambling, alcohol, entertainment, fresh clothing, and beds that remain pleasantly stationary throughout the night. Naturally, local officers prepare themselves. The sheriff knows most cowboys are workers rather than roaming gunmen. Many are young men employed seasonally, earning wages through physically demanding labor. Their occupation requires riding skill, patience, endurance, and knowledge of livestock. The romantic gunslinger comes later. Research preserved through major Western collections, including materials associated with Stanford University and the University of California, helps historians recover this everyday cattle culture. Employment records, newspapers, correspondence, and local documents reveal laborers living inside a rapidly commercializing industry. They also reveal diverse backgrounds. Black cowboys form a significant part of the cattle workforce after the Civil War, alongside white, Mexican-American, and indigenous workers in different regions and circumstances. Their experiences are not identical. Race, local law, employment, and social hierarchy shape how different cowboys encounter Western communities and their officers. The sheriff works inside those inequalities. American law during this period does not operate impartially in every place or toward every person. Racial discrimination, exclusion, and unequal political power affect Western institutions as they affect the nation more broadly. That reality belongs beside the badge. You notice it without leaving the street. One man receives a warning. Another receives suspicion. The difference may reflect behavior, reputation, prejudice, local relationships, or several forces working together. Historical records rarely make every motive clear. Historians still debate the exact social composition of cattle workers across particular trails and decades, partly because surviving records are incomplete. Scholars also continue examining how race and class shaped interactions between working cowboys and local authorities. Research associated with Yale University, Harvard University, and the University of Chicago has expanded Western history toward these social questions. The result is a frontier populated by workers and communities, rather than only celebrated individuals. Still, tonight has practical problems. A local weapons ordinance is being enforced in several famous cattle towns. Authorities attempt to regulate firearms within settled areas. Dodge City later becomes especially associated with restrictions on carrying weapons in town. Other communities establish similar rules under different conditions. The purpose is straightforward. A firearm, useful on a cattle drive, can become dangerous when mixed with crowded rooms, alcohol, gambling disputes, and wounded pride. The sheriff or town officers may expect visitors to leave weapons somewhere secure. Compliance varies. Most men probably understand the logic, even when they dislike the inconvenience. They have spent weeks protecting themselves and livestock across open country. And surrendering a familiar weapon can feel uncomfortable. You watch one cowboy pause. His hand rests near the belt, holding his revolver. Not threateningly, but almost thoughtfully. The officer explains the rule without raising his voice. The cowboy looks toward the saloon, then toward the officer. He sighs. The weapon is surrendered. History does not remember him. That ordinary exchange tells you more about functional authority than many famous shootouts. The officer establishes control because the visitor accepts the rule without forcing a violent test. Law often works through expectation. A person obeys because everyone around him understands what happens next if he refuses. Courts, jails, deputies, employers, business owners, and public opinion all stand quietly behind the officer. The badge is becoming institutional, but institutions still depend upon judgment. Later that evening, shouting rises from a gambling room. A chair scrapes violently across the floor, followed by the sudden silence of people deciding whether to leave. You enter behind the officer. Lamplight shines through tobacco smoke. The air smells of sweat, spilled drink, damp wool, and the heavy warmth of too many bodies sharing one room. Two men are arguing over cards. One accuses the other of cheating. The accused man has heard enough. The officer does not begin by drawing a weapon. He separates them. Questions follow. Witnesses offer contradictory versions because witnesses have apparently been practicing that tradition for centuries. One man is escorted outside. The other remains under watch. Nobody becomes legendary. This is what ordinary peacekeeping looks like. Sheriffs and other officers must judge whether behavior requires arrest, temporary restraint, a warning, or referral to court. Not every disturbance becomes a criminal prosecution. Local relationships matter here. A respected ranch worker, known for occasional drunken foolishness, might receive different treatment from a stranger already suspected of theft. That does not always represent fair justice. Sometimes it reflects practical knowledge. Sometimes it reflects favoritism. The boundary can be uncomfortable. You leave the saloon and feel cool night air against your face. After the crowded room, even the smell of horses seems strangely refreshing. Across the street, several cowboys laugh beside a boarding house. Their evening is going well. No robberies, no duels. One has purchased a ridiculous hat. Peace continues. Contemporary newspapers sometimes sensationalize disorder because unusual events attract readers. Later dime novels, memoir, films, and television amplify certain incidents until the exceptional begins to look routine. Modern historical work complicates that picture. Researchers examining homicide records and municipal evidence have found substantial variation between Western towns. Some experience serious violence during particular periods, while others remain comparatively peaceful. No single statistic captures the West. That uncertainty is important. Historians continue debating how violent Western communities truly were compared with other American places during the same era. Different definitions, incomplete records, migration patterns, and small populations make broad comparisons difficult. The sheriff experiences none of this as a statistical question. One killing is enough when you know the victim. One arrest can divide a neighborhood. One mistake can destroy trust. The work becomes intimate because cattle towns, despite their temporary crowds, contain permanent communities beneath the traffic. Children walk these streets. Families live behind shop fronts. Teachers, cooks, laundresses, clerks, railway employees, craftspeople, laborers, and hotel workers depend upon predictable order. The famous cowboy visit is only one part of their week. The sheriff therefore balances two economic needs. The town wants cattle money. It also wants cattle money to behave itself. Business owners rarely benefit when customers become afraid to enter the commercial district. Regulations can protect commerce as much as public safety. You begin to understand why famous cattle towns eventually become less wild. Successful towns develop. Permanent buildings replace temporary structures. Local institutions strengthen. Property values rise, and residents demand increasingly predictable government. The rough frontier contains the seeds of its own disappearance. Morning approaches slowly. Saloon doors close. Lanterns burn lower, and exhausted workers begin cleaning floors covered with dust from yesterday's boots. The sheriff returns toward the courthouse. His shoulders ache. A prisoner sleeps behind a locked door after refusing the peaceful option offered several hours earlier. Outside, cattle shift quietly beneath the paling sky. The officer has survived another night without participating in the dramatic showdown posterity expects from him. That is success. But beyond town boundaries, a different problem is growing. Horse thieves, robbers, fugitives, and organized bands can escape the regulations governing settled streets. They disappear into distance, and when they do, the sheriff must leave the boardwalk behind and follow them into a jurisdiction measured in days of hard riding. Distance becomes the outlaw's quiet companion as soon as the last buildings disappear behind you. The road thins into two pale tracks, then becomes a trail crossing grassland beneath an enormous western sky. Ahead, somewhere, rides a wanted man. Perhaps he stole horses from a ranch before dawn. Perhaps he participated in a robbery and separated from his companions after leaving town. Whatever happened, the sheriff must find him. That sounds simple when reduced to a sentence. On horseback, it becomes geography. Western counties can cover immense areas, especially where populations remain scattered and administrative boundaries encompass mountains, plains, deserts, forests, or broken river country. A sheriff cannot patrol every road. He cannot watch every settlement. He depends upon reports from residents, deputies, neighboring officers, railway workers, ranchers, stage employees, and anyone else positioned where travelers pass. Information becomes his real weapon. You stop beside a ranch house while your horse lowers its head toward water. The rancher remembers 3 riders passing yesterday afternoon, moving west with several horses. One animal looked freshly branded. That detail matters. Horse theft is more than an inconvenience across 19th century Western communities. Horses provide transportation, labor, military mobility, ranching power, and access to distant markets. Stealing one can seriously damage a household. University collections at Stanford and the University of California preserve legal records. Newspapers, correspondence, and other evidence showing how livestock disputes occupied Western courts and communities. The horse is property with legs. Unfortunately, those legs help it disappear. Cattle present similar difficulties on a much larger scale. Brands assist owners and officials in identifying livestock. But dishonest traders can alter markings, mix stolen animals into herds, or move them toward distant markets. Sheriffs therefore need local knowledge. You learn brands. You remember ranches. You ask who recently purchased animals, who suddenly owns an unfamiliar horse, and which trail reaches the next county without passing through town. There is detective work here, although nobody uses modern equipment. Tracks can provide clues when ground conditions cooperate. Witness descriptions matter, while stolen property sometimes appears in markets, stables, or possession of someone unable to explain it convincingly. But evidence must survive court. Suspicion is not conviction. A sheriff who arrests the wrong person creates legal problems, community anger, and perhaps personal danger. The temptation to act quickly can be strong. Imagine finding a rider whose horse resembles the stolen animal. The saddle matches part of a witness description, and the man behaves nervously when questioned. It feels obvious. Then he produces a believable explanation. The brand is correct. A stable owner confirms his story. You read away with nothing except embarrassment and another long afternoon ahead. That happens too. Historians still debate the actual scale and organization of livestock theft across different Western regions. Contemporary newspapers sometimes portrayed criminal bands as highly organized, while evidence in particular cases suggests looser partnerships or individual opportunism. Scholars associated with Yale University, Princeton University, and the University of Chicago have examined crime through wider questions of economic development and state authority. Such research encourages caution. The word outlaw itself can mislead. Popular memory imagines a distinct social species, recognizable immediately beneath a black hat. Historical offenders are usually ordinary human beings whose crimes vary widely in seriousness, frequency, and motivation. Some commit one offense. Others build repeated careers involving robbery, theft, or violence. Certain groups become notorious because newspapers spread their names across state and territorial boundaries. Railroad expansion gives these criminals new opportunities. Trains carry passengers, valuable freight, mail, payrolls, and express shipments. Stagecoaches also transport money and valuables through routes where isolated stretches provide attractive locations for robbery. Yet transportation networks help officers too. A sheriff can travel faster by rail where lines exist. Telegraph messages can warn distant communities before fugitives arrive. Descriptions move ahead. Names circulate. The frontier becomes connected. A man who once escaped merely by crossing into another county may discover that another sheriff already knows his description. Cooperation between jurisdictions becomes increasingly important as criminals exploit boundaries. The county sheriff does not operate alone. Federal marshals, deputy marshals, municipal officers, constables, railroad detectives, private agents, and other authorities can become involved depending upon the offense. Their responsibilities are not interchangeable. A federal marshal possesses authority tied to federal courts and law. The sheriff remains fundamentally a county officer operating under state or territorial structures. Later Western stories often blur those distinctions. Real jurisdiction is less convenient. Suppose your fugitive crosses a county line. You may coordinate with the sheriff there, rather than behaving as though your badge automatically grants limitless authority everywhere. The law has borders. Criminals notice them. You notice something else as the afternoon darkens. Clouds gather above the hills. Rain begins softly, then hard enough to flatten dust and turn the trail dark beneath the horses. Your coat grows heavy. Water runs from your hat. Wet leather creaks beneath your legs, and tracks that looked useful an hour earlier begin dissolving into mud. Weather has erased evidence without consulting the court. You continue anyway. The emotional rhythm of pursuit changes during these hours. Excitement fades first, replaced by concentration, discomfort, and the slow awareness that the person ahead may possess better horses. Cold arrives after sunset. A deputy unwraps food beside a small fire while everyone discusses the trail. One rider quietly worries about his family because the pursuit has already lasted longer than expected. That intimate concern belongs to the posse as much as courage does. Sheriffs have households too. Deputies have farms, businesses, debts, children, and obligations waiting behind them. Every pursuit costs time. It may cost money. County budgets can be limited, and officers sometimes depend upon fees. Rewards, or reimbursement systems that vary considerably between jurisdictions. Financial arrangements can shape enforcement in uncomfortable ways. Rewards offered for fugitives or stolen property may encourage determined pursuit, but they can also complicate motives. Was an officer enforcing law? Was a private tracker seeking payment? Was an informant telling the truth because justice mattered? Or because money did? Often, motives overlap. Modern historians continue examining how public authority and private incentives interacted across the 19th century West. Archival evidence rarely supports a simple boundary between professional enforcement and community participation. The frontier sheriff lives inside that blurred system. Morning finds you beside a shallow river. Mist hangs above the water, and your fingers feel stiff around the reins. On the opposite bank, fresh hoofprints climb toward higher ground. The pursuit continues. Hours later, smoke appears near a distant cabin. Nobody charges forward. A sensible sheriff considers cover, escape routes, numbers, and whether the suspect is actually inside. Violence remains possible. Avoiding it remains preferable. Perhaps the fugitive surrenders after being surrounded. Perhaps he slips away before officers arrive, leaving an abandoned horse and cold ashes. Either outcome is historically plausible. Not every manhunt ends neatly. Some suspects disappear for months or years. Others are captured through information rather than dramatic pursuit. Arrested while visiting family, entering town, or attempting to sell stolen property. Patience can defeat speed. That lesson changes how you view the sheriff. His authority on the open frontier depends less upon quick shooting than persistence. Relationships, memory, communication, and the willingness to spend miserable days following uncertain information. You finally turn toward home. Dirty water drips from your coat. Your horse walks with exhausted steadiness, and the road stretches through a landscape that suddenly seems larger than before. Somewhere behind you, a fugitive may be secured, or perhaps he escaped. Either way, the sheriff has discovered the basic truth of frontier pursuit. A badge cannot cover distance alone for the hardest searches. He needs more riders, more eyes, and people who understand the country better than any paper map. Soon those citizens will saddle their horses beside him. The posse is waiting. Those extra riders gather before sunrise, emerging from dark houses and stable yards, while the county seat remains mostly asleep. Saddles creak beneath their weight, horses stamp against cold ground, and quiet voices exchange the latest information. This is the posse. The word carries enormous weight in Western mythology, summoning images of armed riders racing across open country behind desperate fugitives. The historical reality is more practical, more varied, and usually much less theatrical. A sheriff needs help. He may have only a few regular deputies, perhaps fewer than the situation requires. When a dangerous suspect escapes across a large jurisdiction, local citizens can become temporary extensions of legal authority. The tradition is older than the Wild West. American sheriffs inherit the practice from earlier legal customs that allow officers to summon able citizens when necessary to assist in enforcing law. Western conditions simply make that old principle unusually useful. You join the riders outside town. One man owns a ranch near the northern creek. Another works with horses and knows nearly every trail crossing the surrounding hills. A third has brought food. Someone forgot gloves. Already, the legend is becoming human. The sheriff explains what is known. 2 fugitives may have crossed a river yesterday after stealing horses and supplies from a ranch. Nobody knows their exact destination. The posse rides anyway. Hooves strike frozen earth, while dawn slowly reveals fences, distant ridges, and patches of dirty snow gathered in shaded hollows. Cold air stings your face. Horse breath rises around the group. A professional police force could eventually assign trained officers to such a search, but many 19th century Western counties possess nothing comparable to modern departments. The sheriff must improvise with available people. Historical records, preserved through institutions such as Stanford University and the University of California, show communities repeatedly participating in law enforcement. Citizens provide information, assist searches, serve on juries, guard prisoners, and sometimes join organized pursuits. Community involvement gives frontier authority reach. It also creates risk. The men riding beside the sheriff may know the landscape extremely well, but they are not necessarily trained officers. Some have never arrested anyone. One rider may be calm under pressure. Another may become dangerously enthusiastic. The sheriff must manage both. You feel that responsibility when the trail reaches a fork beside a shallow creek. Mud around the water contains overlapping tracks from cattle, horses, wagons, and wildlife. Everyone has an opinion. The rancher believes the fugitives turned south. Another rider insists they headed toward the hills. A third confidently announces something nobody else can see. The sheriff listens. Then he chooses. Local knowledge can be extraordinarily valuable because residents understand seasonal routes, abandoned cabins, water sources, and places where travelers can obtain supplies. A paper map shows geography. A rancher remembers who lives there. That distinction matters when fugitives depend upon friends or relatives for shelter. Sheriffs often investigate personal networks because wanted people rarely disappear into complete isolation. They need food, they need horses, they may need money, medical assistance, or information about officers searching nearby. Every need creates another possible witness. Modern historians continue debating how effective posses actually were across different Western regions. Records often celebrate successful pursuits, while failed searches leave thinner documentary traces, making broad conclusions difficult. Scholars at Yale University, Princeton University, and the University of Chicago have examined 19th-century state building and community authority from wider perspectives. Their work helps explain why formal institutions often depend upon informal local cooperation. Yet cooperation can become coercion. A sheriff's request carries official weight. And historical expectations surrounding civic duty differ from modern assumptions about professional policing. Some citizens volunteer eagerly, others may join reluctantly. A man with crops waiting, livestock needing attention, or children at home may view a multi-day pursuit as an expensive interruption. Time matters, food matters, horses matter. You understand this by midday. The sun has climbed. But the cold remains beneath your coat. One horse has developed a problem with its shoe, forcing the group to stop beside a stand of cottonwoods. The fugitives gain distance while you wait. No heroic painting includes this part. One rider crouches beside the animal, fingers stiff from cold iron, while another passes around dried food. Someone tells a poor joke. Everyone laughs anyway. Then the pursuit resumes. Pauses also reveal the social divisions inside frontier communities. Who gets invited to ride can depend upon race, status, reputation, political loyalty, and local relationships. Who receives protection can depend upon those things too. Law enforcement does not stand outside society. It reflects society. That becomes especially troubling where personal feuds influence legal action. A posse assembled to capture a suspect might contain men who already dislike him for unrelated reasons. The sheriff must preserve a distinction between arrest and revenge. That distinction can become dangerously thin. You approach a cabin late in the afternoon after learning the fugitives may have stopped there for water. The riders spread out. Wet leather squeaks softly as horses move through brush. Nobody speaks above a whisper. Inside, someone shifts. The sheriff calls out. For several seconds, nothing happens. Then the door opens. An elderly man appears, irritated rather than frightened. He has seen the fugitives, but they left hours earlier after asking directions toward a mountain pass. The posse has arrived late. Again, frustration settles over the group. This is where discipline matters. Exhaustion encourages impatience, and uncertainty can turn every stranger into a suspected accomplice. The sheriff asks questions instead. What horses were they riding? Did they carry supplies? Were they injured? Which direction did they take? The answers rebuild the trail. Information moves from one person to another, creating a chain across the landscape. The posse follows. By evening, rain replaces the cold sunlight. Water darkens coats and collects along hat brims, while the road becomes slippery beneath tired animals. The group shelters briefly near an abandoned structure. Rain strikes the roof. Nobody says much. Exhausted silence has its own sound, shaped by breathing horses, dripping clothing, and the occasional movement of someone trying to find a less uncomfortable position. One rider unfolds a paper map. The sheriff studies it beside a lantern. A mountain crossing lies ahead, but another route leads toward a railway settlement. The fugitives may choose either. Now local knowledge returns. A rancher explains that recent rain makes the mountain trail dangerous. Anyone familiar with the country would probably avoid it. Probably. That word guides many searches. The sheriff decides upon the railway route. At dawn, the posse reaches a small settlement where a stable worker remembers two men changing horses. A telegraph office stands nearby. Technology joins the chase. A message can now travel faster than every horse in the posse. Another sheriff farther along route receives descriptions and instructions to watch roads and railway connections. The pursuit becomes regional. This combination of local riders and expanding communication networks marks an important transition in Western law enforcement. The posse belongs to an older community tradition. The telegraph belongs to a connected future. The sheriff uses both. Hours later, word returns. Two men, matching the descriptions, have been detained in another jurisdiction after attempting to sell a horse linked to the original theft. The riders stop. There is no final charge. No bullets cross a sunset. Someone simply exhales. The sheriff now faces paperwork, prisoner transfer arrangements, evidence, witnesses, and eventual court proceedings. Capture is not the end. It is the beginning of another legal process. You turn toward home, with the posse spreading gradually apart as riders leave for their own farms and businesses. One man worries about neglected livestock. Another complains about his saddle. Everyone wants warm food. The community has temporarily become law enforcement, then quietly becomes ordinary society again. That transformation reveals the sheriff's greatest practical resource. He cannot control an enormous county through personal strength. He needs cooperation. But cooperation carries friendships, grudges, loyalties, prejudices, and political expectations into the machinery of justice. Soon those pressures will follow the sheriff back inside the courthouse. There, the trail becomes an election, the weapon becomes influence, and the next struggle over the badge will be fought through politics rather than pursuit. Politics waits inside the courthouse with cleaner boots than the posse. But it can be equally difficult to escape. You return from the pursuit expecting rest, only to find conversations already forming around the next election. The sheriff's badge is public authority. That makes it political. Across much of the 19th century West, sheriffs are elected county officials, although specific arrangements vary by jurisdiction and period. Winning office therefore requires more than knowing trails, handling prisoners, or remaining calm during arrests. You need voters. You may also need allies. A courthouse corridor smells of paper, lamp oil, damp coats, and wood smoke from a stove struggling against the morning cold. Men gather near doorways, discussing candidates with a seriousness normally reserved for weather and livestock. The sheriff hears his own name. Perhaps that is never relaxing. County elections can bring together party loyalty, personal reputation, ethnic relationships, business interests, and old grievances. A candidate known as courageous may still lose if voters distrust his politics. Another may win because influential residents support him. The office sits inside the larger political culture of 19th century America, where local government often depends upon party networks and personal connections. Modern historical research associated with institutions such as Princeton University and the University of Chicago has examined the strength of 19th century political parties. Such scholarship shows how deeply partisan organization could shape public offices and local government. The West does not exist beyond politics. It carries politics westward. Migration brings Democrats, Republicans, former Union soldiers, former Confederates, immigrants, business owners, laborers, farmers, miners, ranchers, and people whose political loyalties change with local circumstances. Territorial politics can be particularly complicated. Before statehood, territorial governors and other officials may be appointed through federal authority, while many local offices operate through territorial laws and elections. Layers of government overlap again. The sheriff must understand where his authority begins and where another official's authority takes over. That becomes uncomfortable when political allies expect favors. Imagine a merchant who supported your campaign entering the office with a complaint. He wants immediate action against a debtor and reminds you, gently, how enthusiastically he encouraged people to vote. The meaning is obvious. You look at the paperwork. The legal basis is less obvious. This is where the badge becomes a test of character. A sheriff who uses authority for political allies risks damaging public trust. Yet refusing influential supporters may threaten his position at the next election. The temptation is old. So is corruption. Western newspapers regularly accuse officials of dishonesty, favoritism, incompetence, or political manipulation. Some accusations reflect genuine misconduct, while others emerge from partisan rivalry. You cannot accept every newspaper charge as fact. Editors have interests too. Historians still debate how widespread corruption was within particular Western governments, because accusations often come from political opponents. Surviving records may establish wrongdoing in some cases, while leaving motives uncertain in others. Research connected with Yale University, Stanford University, and Columbia University has encouraged historians to examine political power through institutions rather than colorful personalities alone. That approach changes your view of the courthouse. A sheriff is connected to judges, commissioners, clerks, prosecutors, tax systems, elections, and budgets. His effectiveness depends partly upon how these institutions work together. Money becomes especially important. The sheriff needs deputies. Prisoners need food. Horses require care. Travel costs accumulate. Jails need repairs. A county with limited revenue cannot simply produce professional law enforcement through enthusiasm. Some sheriffs historically receive compensation through combinations of salaries, fees, commissions, or payments attached to particular duties. Arrangements differ widely across jurisdictions and decades. Fee systems can create awkward incentives. Serving a document may produce compensation. Transporting a prisoner may produce another payment. Collecting certain taxes might involve commissions. The sheriff, therefore, performs public duties within a financial structure that can appear surprisingly entrepreneurial to modern eyes. Not every officer abuses that system. Still, incentives matter. You hear coins counted behind a desk while receipts lie beside an ink bottle. Outside, someone complains that government always remembers money more efficiently than potholes. Some things transcend centuries. Election season increases the pressure. Candidates travel through communities, speaking with ranchers, merchants, miners, laborers, and local leaders. Reputation spreads through conversation long before campaign advertising becomes modern. People remember arrests. They remember failures too. A prisoner escaping from jail can become a political disaster. A controversial posse may divide voters. An unpopular tax collection can follow a sheriff into every conversation until Election Day. Personal courage helps, but administration may decide careers. The sheriff also needs deputies he trusts. Appointments can create another political problem because supporters may expect positions after an election victory. Patronage is common throughout 19th century American politics. A loyal campaign worker may become a deputy even when another man possesses better qualifications. Sometimes loyalty and competence happen to meet. Sometimes they apparently never receive an introduction. You watch a newly appointed deputy attempt to organize court papers. His expression suggests he would rather pursue 6 armed fugitives through a blizzard. Paper defeats him, yet paperwork is authority made visible. A warrant must identify the correct person. Property records matter. Prisoner transfers require documentation. And court orders need accurate execution. Errors can undermine cases. The frontier sheriff, therefore, needs literacy, organization, judgment, local knowledge, physical endurance, and political skill. The gun is almost the easy part. Territorial development adds another dimension. As settlements grow, counties can be reorganized and new jurisdictions created. A town hoping to become a county seat may compete fiercely with another community for that status. The stakes are substantial. A county seat attracts government activity, legal business, visitors, and commercial opportunities. Courthouses become symbols of permanence and local importance. Political rivalry can therefore attach itself to geography. You stand outside one courthouse while winter wind drives dirty snow against the steps. Residents from a rival town insist the county government belongs closer to them. Their arguments involve distance, population, roads, and fairness. Their emotions involve everything else. The sheriff may be forced to remain neutral while neighbors choose sides. That neutrality can become even harder during contested elections. 19th century voting practices differ from modern systems, and elections can produce allegations of intimidation, fraudulent ballots, disputed counts, or improper registration. Local law officers may be called upon to preserve order. But what happens when the sheriff himself is a candidate? The question exposes an obvious tension. He possesses public authority while seeking public approval. A political opponent may accuse him of using deputies to influence voters. His supporters may insist he is merely maintaining peace. Accounts differ. No clear agreement survives in many local controversies. The responsible historian resists filling those gaps with certainty. You do the same. Rather than imagining every sheriff as corrupt or noble, you see individuals navigating systems that mix public service with local politics. Some exploit the office, others defend its independence. Most probably occupy complicated ground between ideal behavior and practical survival. Even famous lawmen operate within these networks. Their later legends often remove election campaigns, business relationships, appointments, debts, rivalries, and administrative compromises because such details disturb the cleaner story of heroic justice. Reality is richer. The sheriff removes his badge at night, but his neighbors still know who he is. He meets voters in stores. His family hears criticism. A defeated opponent may live 3 streets away. An arrested man's relatives may appear at the same community gathering next month. Authority remains intimate. You feel that intimacy as distant bells mark the evening hour. The courthouse empties, leaving scattered papers and the fading warmth of the stove. Outside, wet streets reflect lantern light. The sheriff steps into the cold. His election may be secure, or another candidate may soon replace him. The office belongs to the county rather than the man wearing the badge. That distinction will matter greatly when later generations remember certain sheriffs as permanent heroes. Names such as Pat Garrett and John Slaughter will become larger than their offices. But before legend takes over, their documented careers must survive the stories built around them. The names begin to grow larger than the offices they once occupied. Newspapers repeat them, memoirs reshape them, and later storytellers polish complicated careers into cleaner tales of courage and justice. You have reached the dangerous territory of fame. The Western sheriff becomes a symbol here before following any famous badge. However, you remember what the previous years have taught you. A sheriff serves papers, guards prisoners, manages deputies, handles county responsibilities, and answers to political realities. The famous men do those things too. They simply acquire better legends. Pat Garrett offers one of the clearest examples. Born in Alabama in 1850, Garrett moves west while still young and eventually becomes connected with Lincoln County, New Mexico. His name becomes inseparable from Billy the Kid. Yet Garrett's famous pursuit grows from a much larger period of conflict in New Mexico, where economic competition, political alliances, personal rivalries, and weak institutions produce prolonged instability. The Lincoln County War begins in 1878. Despite its famous name, it is not a conventional military war. Competing commercial and political factions struggle for influence, and violence draws merchants, ranchers, hired gunmen, law officers, and local supporters into dangerous alliances. Billy the Kid becomes one participant. Later legend makes him almost everything. Outlaw, rebel, romantic hero, cold criminal. Each generation seems determined to dress him differently. Garrett enters the story as sheriff of Lincoln County after being elected in 1880. His responsibility includes pursuing Billy and other wanted men connected with continuing violence in the region. Historical records establish the central sequence. Garrett and his party capture Billy the Kid in December 1880. Billy is later tried and sentenced to death for the killing of Sheriff William Brady, but he escapes custody in April 1881. The escape leaves 2 deputies dead. Garrett begins searching again. On July 14, 1881, he encounters Billy at Fort Sumner and kills him during a nighttime confrontation. The event becomes Western legend almost immediately, but the surviving accounts do not answer every question with perfect clarity. Details concerning Billy's final moments have been argued over for generations, and later retellings often add confidence where evidence remains limited. Historians still debate elements of that encounter and Garrett's wider reputation. The responsible approach is to separate documented events from embellishments accumulated through memoir, journalism, folklore, and entertainment. Major archival collections associated with institutions, including Yale University and the University of New Mexico, have supported scholarship on Western violence and memory. Research across American universities has repeatedly shown how frontier stories change when later generations retell them. You can almost watch that transformation happening. Imagine Garrett returning from a pursuit. His clothing smells of horse sweat and dust. His eyes are tired, his face weathered, and there is paperwork waiting somewhere behind the excitement. Yet posterity does not want the paperwork. Posterity wants the gun. Garrett himself contributes to the creation of the Billy legend by publishing an account of the outlaw's life in 1882. Like many 19th century narratives involving celebrated figures, it must be read critically rather than treated as perfectly neutral evidence. Memory has interests. So do authors. The same caution follows you toward another famous sheriff, John Horton Slaughter. Born in Louisiana in 1841, Slaughter serves in Confederate forces during the Civil War before building a career connected with cattle and ranching in the Southwest. By the 1880s, he is operating in Arizona Territory. He becomes sheriff of Cochise County in 1887 and serves into 1890, entering an office associated with one of the most mythologized regions of the American frontier. Cochise County includes Tombstone. By Slaughter's time as sheriff, the famous confrontation near the OK Corral has already occurred years earlier. Yet cattle theft, robbery, smuggling, and violence continue challenging authorities across the border region. Slaughter develops a reputation for determination. Later stories sometimes portray him as an almost unstoppable frontier figure who personally terrifies criminals into submission. Reality deserves more patience. As sheriff, he works with deputies and operates within county government. He relies upon information, local networks, legal authority, horses, communication, and cooperation just as less famous sheriffs do. The landscape itself becomes part of his challenge. You read it through southern Arizona beneath a hard sun. Dry air pulls moisture from your lips. Leather grows warm beneath your hands. And distant mountains seem closer than they actually are. Distances deceive here. Water determines routes. A suspect crossing toward the international boundary adds another layer of difficulty because jurisdiction does not obediently follow hoofprints. Border regions create opportunities for people moving, stolen livestock, or avoiding authority. Sheriffs must cooperate with other officers and work through legal limitations that heroic stories often ignore. No badge controls the desert. That simple fact matters. Stanford University and the University of California preserve extensive Western collections that allow historians to compare legend with surviving evidence. Newspapers, legal files, correspondence, census material, and government records often reveal lives far more complicated than popular mythology. This complexity also applies to other celebrated lawmen. Wyatt Earp is frequently called a sheriff in casual Western storytelling. Yet his offices include roles such as deputy sheriff and town law officer, rather than the simple permanent identity later culture assigns him. Bat Masterson likewise holds several law enforcement positions and serves as sheriff of Ford County, Kansas, after winning election in 1877. His career demonstrates how quickly occupations can change. Masterson works as a buffalo hunter, scout, law officer, gambler, sports writer, and journalist during different periods of his life. The frontier does not always provide tidy professions. A man can wear a badge for several years and spend decades doing something else. Yet memory freezes him at the moment audiences find most interesting. You picture Masterson inside a county office rather than beneath a theatrical sunset. Papers lie across a desk. Boots scrape outside, and someone complains about an issue too ordinary for biography. This is still the famous lawman. He simply has administration. The difference between documented history and legend becomes especially visible through newspapers. 19th century journalism provides invaluable evidence. But papers also compete for readers and reflect political interests. Sensational stories travel well. A dramatic arrest might appear in multiple publications, gaining new details each time, years later. A memoir can repeat the embellished version, then a novelist borrows it. Eventually, fiction begins citing folklore without knowing the difference. Harvard University, Princeton University, and Columbia University scholars have contributed broadly to studies of American memory, media, and myth-making. Such research helps explain why cultural legends often reveal later values as much as original events. The famous sheriff becomes useful. It represents order without bureaucracy, justice without delay, courage without uncertainty. Real sheriffs possess none of those luxuries. Garrett's later life demonstrates the difference painfully. Killing Billy the Kid does not guarantee permanent admiration, financial security, or an uncomplicated reputation. Garrett holds other positions and pursues various business interests, but his fortunes remain uneven. In 1908, long after the period covered by your journey toward 1900, Garrett himself is shot and killed in New Mexico. His story refuses a heroic ending. Slaughter also becomes more than his badge. Ranching remains central to his life, and his reputation grows through decades of retelling after his law enforcement career. The men continue. The legends stop them in time for a moment. You stand inside a quiet sheriff's office after midnight. Candle smoke curls toward dark rafters. Cold iron rests inside a drawer, and a half-completed document waits beside an ink bottle. No crowd watches. No newspaper reporter stands nearby. A tired sheriff rubs his eyes. This may be the most truthful image of all. Famous lawmen deserve attention because their careers illuminate real conflicts and institutions. Yet thousands of ordinary duties performed by forgotten officers kept western counties functioning without producing legends. Tomorrow brings court. Prisoners need meals. Warrants require service. Taxes remain unpopular. The badge returns from mythology to work. And once you follow it through the courthouse doors, the quiet machinery behind frontier justice finally becomes impossible to overlook. The badge returns to work before sunrise, when the famous names have faded and the courthouse belongs again to ordinary responsibilities. A weak lamp burns inside the office, while frost gathers along the lower edge of a window. You hear paper before gunfire. Pages turn beneath tired fingers. A pen scratches across a ledger, and somewhere beyond the wall, a prisoner coughs inside the county jail. This is frontier law at its most common. The sheriff begins with documents requiring service across the county. A court summons must reach one resident, while another paper orders property seized under legal authority. There are warrants as well. None can enforce itself. You pull on a coat still carrying yesterday's smell of horse sweat and wood smoke. Outside, frozen mud has hardened around wagon tracks, making every step uneven. The first journey takes several hours. Serving legal papers sounds almost comically peaceful beside Western legend. Yet it places the sheriff directly inside private conflicts. He may deliver notices involving debts, property, lawsuits, or court appearances. People rarely celebrate his arrival. A rancher opens his door and sees the document in your hand. His expression changes before you say anything. Perhaps he expected it. Perhaps he hoped the problem would somehow disappear. You explain the purpose calmly, record the service, and leave without confrontation. Nothing dramatic happens. The legal system advances one small step. County records preserved throughout the American West demonstrate how heavily sheriffs participated in this administrative machinery. Collections maintained by universities, including Stanford and the University of California, allow historians to reconstruct the everyday functioning of courts and local government. The evidence is wonderfully inconvenient for mythology. Sheriffs spend enormous amounts of time doing things no actor would request for an action scene. They serve papers. They maintain records. They transport prisoners. They arrange guards. They execute court orders. They may collect certain fees or taxes according to local law. And someone must keep the jail functioning. You return there near midday. Cold iron presses against your palm as the lock turns. Inside, the air carries the smell of damp clothing, old bedding, food, smoke, and too many people occupying limited space. A prisoner asks about his hearing. Another wants water. Someone complains about breakfast. The sheriff cannot simply lock people inside and forget them. Prisoners remain under county responsibility while awaiting hearings, trials, sentencing, transportation, or release. Conditions vary widely. Some western counties construct substantial brick or stone jails as towns become wealthier. Newer communities may rely upon wooden facilities, offering less security and fewer comforts. Escape remains a constant concern. A poorly fitted window, weak wall, careless guard, hidden tool, or sympathetic visitor can transform an ordinary night into a political disaster by morning. The sheriff checks doors, checks locks, checks again. Jail administration reveals the intimate side of authority. A prisoner might be accused of serious violence, yet still require food, warmth, medical attention, and protection while legally confined. The officer may dislike him. Duty remains. Historians still debate the quality and consistency of 19th century incarceration across Western jurisdictions because surviving evidence is uneven. Local newspapers might describe terrible conditions, while officials insist facilities are adequate. Neither source should automatically receive the final word. Research associated with Yale University, Harvard University, and the University of Chicago has broadened the history of American criminal justice beyond famous trials. Institutional records reveal how punishment and custody changed alongside population growth and government expansion. The sheriff occupies the practical edge of that transformation. This afternoon, he must move a prisoner. The courthouse handling the case lies far enough away that transportation becomes a serious responsibility. Perhaps the route follows a stage road, railway connection, or long stretch traveled on horseback. Security must be balanced with basic human endurance. You secure the prisoner and begin. Wind crosses the road without obstruction. Dust catches inside your collar, and the prisoner shifts awkwardly while restraints rub against his wrists. Neither of you is comfortable. Hours pass. Conversation eventually replaces silence. The prisoner asks about the distance remaining. The deputy gives an answer suspiciously similar to the one offered an hour earlier. The road continues. Such journeys create opportunities for escape or rescue, especially when prisoners have friends willing to intervene. Officers must choose routes, stopping places, and guards carefully. Yet most transfers probably pass without legendary incidents. That quiet success leaves little story behind. Upon arrival, paperwork returns. The receiving authority needs the correct prisoner, legal documentation, and information explaining why custody is being transferred. Names matter, dates matter, court orders matter. A mistake can become serious. The Western sheriff, therefore, operates within a culture of written law, even when his physical surroundings appear rough. The courthouse may have warped boards. The ink may freeze during brutal weather. The legal document still matters. This relationship between written authority and physical hardship becomes one of the defining features of frontier government. Princeton and Columbia scholars studying 19th century American institutions have shown how state power develops through ordinary administrative practices. Authority becomes durable when records, procedures, offices, and expectations continue beyond individual personalities. The sheriff is temporary. The office remains. Election defeat, resignation, death, or retirement can remove one man and replace him with another. The jail keys change hands. The ledgers stay. You see those ledgers stacked inside a cabinet, filled with names that history will mostly forget. A merchant involved in a debt case, a ranch hand accused of theft, a traveler detained after a fight, a witness summoned to court. Each name represents a moment when private life touched public authority. Some cases end quickly, others consume months. The sheriff continues between them. Even taxes can fall within his responsibilities in certain jurisdictions, making him part law officer and part revenue collector. That combination does little for popularity. Imagine arriving at a farm during a difficult season. The family has experienced poor weather, livestock losses, and disappointing crops. Now government wants payment. The farmer looks toward the field. You look at the document. Neither person enjoys the moment. But counties require revenue to operate courts, maintain buildings, repair infrastructure, and pay officials. Government needs money even where money remains scarce. This is the unromantic foundation beneath the badge. Evening brings another task. A warrant has arrived concerning a man living several miles outside town. The alleged offense is not famous, but the court expects him to appear. You saddle again. Your back objects. Nobody consults it. By the time you reach the property, darkness has settled over the road. A dog barks behind a fence while warm light escapes through a cabin window. The man answers. You explain the warrant, for several seconds. Tension hangs between you. Then his shoulders fall. He asks whether he can collect his coat. You allow it. Inside, his wife quietly places food into a cloth bundle for him. Their child watches from beside the stove, confused by the badge at the door. This is arrest without legend. The sheriff is enforcing law while entering a family's evening. The emotional weight comes precisely because nobody fires a weapon. You read a back beneath the cold sky, carrying responsibility beside you. The courthouse appears after midnight. Inside, the jail receives another prisoner. Another name enters another record, and another key turns inside cold iron. Tomorrow will bring more papers, but outside the courthouse, Western society is becoming increasingly complicated. Labor disputes, racial conflict, land struggles, vigilantism, and community feuds will challenge the idea that law serves everyone equally. The sheriff can manage paperwork. The harder question is what happens when the entire community disagrees about justice. That harder question waits beyond the courthouse doors, where disagreement can involve far more than one prisoner or one warrant. By the 1880s and 1890s, many Western communities have grown larger, wealthier, and more connected. They have also become more complicated. You step outside on a cold morning and hear wagons moving along a road softened by overnight rain. Telegraph wires stretch toward distant towns. Railway schedules shape commerce. And newspapers carry arguments between communities almost as efficiently as they carry news. The sheriff now serves a society changing around him. Mining remains important in many regions. Ranching occupies enormous landscapes. Farming expands. Railroads connect markets, and towns attract merchants, laborers, families, investors, immigrants, and travelers. Different interests meet in the same county. Sometimes they collide. Land provides one source of tension. Ranchers may depend upon access to grazing, while farmers fence property and establish claims that alter older patterns of movement. Water can become equally sensitive. A creek that looks peaceful beneath morning sunlight may support farms, livestock, households, and businesses whose needs exceed what dry seasons comfortably provide. The sheriff cannot create more water. He may still be ordered to enforce a court decision about access, property, or possession. You are headed toward one disputed ranch with rain striking your coat. Mud pulls at the horses' hooves, and low clouds hide the distant mountains. Two families are waiting. Their argument began months ago. By now, each side remembers every insult more clearly than the original disagreement. The sheriff serves an order. Nobody smiles. Yet this is what stronger institutions increasingly demand. Instead of neighbors settling disputes through threats or private force, courts are expected to decide legal questions. Enforcement then becomes the sheriff's responsibility. The transition is imperfect. Feuds demonstrate how personal conflict can resist institutional control. Some Western disputes expand through families, business partners, political allies, and hired supporters until individual grievances become community divisions. Rumor makes everything worse. One stolen animal becomes retaliation. Retaliation becomes another accusation. Soon nobody remembers who began anything. Historians still debate the origins and boundaries of several famous Western feuds because contemporary accounts often reflect partisan loyalties. Witnesses contradict one another. Newspapers choose sides, and later storytellers simplify tangled events. Modern scholarship associated with Stanford University, Yale University, and the University of California has encouraged historians to place these conflicts within wider economic and political conditions. That broader view matters. Violence rarely grows from personality alone. Land values, cattle markets, elections, business competition, family alliances, and uncertain legal authority can all contribute. The sheriff may belong to one network while attempting to police another. Neutrality becomes difficult, sometimes impossible. You feel the pressure inside a crowded courthouse corridor. Men speak quietly in separate groups while wet coats drip onto the wooden floor. Everyone watches the sheriff. One faction believes he favors its enemies. The other believes exactly the same thing. Perhaps that means he is doing something correctly. Perhaps everyone simply dislikes him. Racial conflict presents an even deeper challenge. Western expansion brings communities of different backgrounds into economic and political systems marked by unequal rights and widespread prejudice. Black Americans move west after the Civil War as soldiers. Settlers, cowboys, laborers, and entrepreneurs, Chinese immigrants contribute heavily to Western mining, agriculture, commerce, and railroad construction. Mexican-American communities have long histories across territories incorporated into the United States. Indigenous nations remain central to the history of the West, despite relentless pressure upon their lands and sovereignty. Law does not treat everyone equally. Local prejudice can influence arrests, testimony, jury decisions, policing, and access to political power. State and territorial laws themselves may discriminate against particular groups. The sheriff operates inside these structures. He may enforce unjust laws. He may also face mobs threatening people whom he has a legal duty to protect. The badge, therefore, cannot automatically be treated as a symbol of fairness. Harvard University and Columbia University scholars, among many others, have examined race and citizenship across 19th century America. Their research shows that Western development occurs within national struggles over who receives protection. Political participation, property rights, and legal recognition. The consequences become painfully local. Imagine a prisoner inside the jail while an angry crowd gathers outside. The accusation against him is serious, but no trial has occurred. The sheriff hears voices rising beyond the walls. Lantern light moves across the windows while deputies check doors and count available weapons. The prisoner listens too. His breathing changes. For the sheriff, the principle is simple. A person in lawful custody should remain protected for the courts. The practical problem is frightening. A determined mob may greatly outnumber the officers. Some sheriffs resist such crowds. Others fail to prevent prisoners from being seized, while some law officers historically participate in or tolerate extra-legal violence. No comforting generalization survives. Vigilantism continues appearing in Western history, because formal institutions do not immediately eliminate the desire for direct community punishment. Supporters claim courts are ineffective. Opponents see mob authority replacing law. The conflict asks a fundamental question: who decides justice? That question also emerges in labor disputes. Western mines, railroads, and industrial operations employ large workforces whose interests can conflict sharply with owners and managers. Strikes may bring demonstrations, replacement workers, private guards, local officers, or state forces into the same tense environment. A county sheriff can find himself responsible for preserving order, while both sides accuse him of serving the other. Business interests may demand protection for property. Workers may demand protection from intimidation. Political leaders want calm. Nobody agrees on its meaning. Research from Princeton University and the University of Chicago has examined the turbulent relationship between labor, capital, and government during America's industrial expansion. The West belongs to that national story. It is not merely cowboys and open land. You stand beside a railway yard where sweaty uniforms cling to tired workers beneath afternoon heat. Men speak in low voices near stacked freight, while company representatives watch from farther away. A deputy shifts uneasily beside you. No violence has occurred. The possibility shapes every movement. A skilled sheriff tries to prevent escalation. He speaks with organizers. He speaks with employers. He keeps armed groups apart where possible and attempts to distinguish lawful protest from criminal behavior. Success may produce nothing memorable. Failure may become history. Again, the quiet outcome disappears. Environmental conditions add another layer to these conflicts. Drought can intensify competition over water and grazing, while harsh winters destroy livestock and leave ranchers financially desperate. Economic pressure changes behavior. A stolen cow means something different when a family has plenty than when the surviving herd represents everything remaining after winter. The sheriff sees desperation before historians name it. He sees worn boots, empty cupboards, unpaid debts, anger shaped by fear, and he still has to enforce the warrant. By the 1890s, stronger courts, railroads, telegraphs, established county governments, and growing towns make official authority more durable across much of the West. Professional police departments expand in larger municipalities. Sheriffs increasingly operate beside more specialized institutions. The frontier is changing. You notice it one evening while standing outside a brick courthouse, replacing the older wooden building. Electric lighting appears in some growing Western cities, while telephone networks begin transforming communication during the late 19th century. The sheriff's world is becoming modern, yet old tensions remain. Land, money, race, labor, political loyalty, personal honor. No technology removes them. The badge becomes stronger institutionally, while remaining vulnerable morally. Authority can preserve peace, but it can also reinforce inequality or serve powerful interests. That contradiction belongs in the history. You walk home beneath distant bells while rainwater shines across the street. Behind you, the courthouse windows glow against the darkness. Inside are records of disputes settled peacefully. There are also records of failures. Together they reveal communities struggling to replace private force with public law. Soon, however, popular memory will begin editing that complicated struggle. The paperwork will fade. The prejudice will fade. The political compromises will fade. A lone sheriff will remain beneath a western sunset. And myth will begin replacing reality. That western sunset becomes brighter as the real frontier begins fading behind it. By the late 19th century, stories about sheriffs travel farther than many sheriffs themselves ever traveled. The badge enters popular culture. You see the transformation beginning in newspapers. Cheap fiction, traveling entertainment, memoirs, and conversations repeated around fires or saloon tables. Complicated careers become adventures, while administrative work quietly disappears from memory. Nobody writes breathlessly about tax records. A pursuit sounds better. A gunfight sounds better still. This does not mean frontier stories are entirely invented. Many begin with real people, genuine crime, documented arrests, dangerous pursuits, and communities struggling to maintain order. The transformation happens through selection. One exciting afternoon survives while 10 years of ordinary mornings vanish. You can almost watch the process inside a newspaper office. Metal type waits in trays. Paper smells of fresh ink. And an editor considers which story deserves the largest headline. A routine arrest occupies little space. A notorious outlaw sells papers. Newspapers are among the most important sources for understanding 19th century Western life. But they require careful reading. Editors possess political loyalties, commercial interests, personal rivalries, and audiences expecting compelling stories. Accuracy matters, so does circulation. Research preserved by institutions such as Stanford University and the University of California helps historians compare newspaper reporting with court files, letters, government records, and other surviving evidence. That comparison often reveals contradictions. An officer described as fearless in one paper may be criticized as incompetent in another. A confrontation presented as obvious self-defense by supporters may appear unnecessary to opponents. The sheriff becomes several people at once. Then dime novels accelerate the transformation. Cheap popular fiction reaches large audiences during the 19th century, offering dramatic stories of adventure, danger, crime, romance, and Western life. Historical figures sometimes appear beside fictional characters. Real geography meets imaginary dialogue. The boundary becomes pleasantly inconvenient. Readers far from Western cattle towns can experience an imagined frontier where danger waits behind every saloon door and justice depends upon extraordinary individuals. The sheriff fits perfectly. I needs only a badge, courage, a dangerous opponent, and perhaps a street conveniently empty enough for a confrontation. Actual county commissioners are rarely invited. The fictional sheriff also becomes simpler than his historical counterpart. Politics recede. Paperwork disappears. Racial inequality becomes easier to ignore. And jurisdiction becomes whatever the plot requires. Justice becomes personal. The hero knows who is guilty. The audience knows too. The court seems almost unnecessary. Real sheriffs possess no such certainty. They work with witnesses who disagree, evidence that disappears, political pressure, limited budget, unreliable information, and suspects who may actually be innocent. Myth removes uncertainty because uncertainty slows the story. Historians still debate precisely how much popular entertainment shaped public understanding of the 19th century West, while the frontier period itself remained active. Audiences encountered overlapping influences from newspapers, fiction, stage productions, personal recollections, and later motion pictures. Scholarship associated with Yale University, Harvard University, and Columbia University has explored how national memory develops through repeated cultural storytelling. The Western sheriff becomes an ideal case. He represents order, arriving where institutions appear weak. That image satisfies something deeper than historical curiosity. A single person is easier to understand than a county government. You know his face. You know his enemy. You know what must happen. Reality refuses this arrangement. Consider Pat Garrett again. His documented career includes elections, appointments, financial difficulties, political relationships, business ventures, and periods when his public reputation becomes uncertain. Yet cultural memory repeatedly returns to one event. Billy the Kid. Garrett becomes the man who killed him. Everything else circles that moment. Bat Masterson undergoes a similar transformation. His life extends far beyond the years when he carries Western law enforcement authority. He eventually works as a journalist in New York City. That is quite a journey for the eternal frontier gunfighter. But mythology prefers him younger. John Slaughter becomes another figure, whose reputation grows through stories emphasizing toughness and relentless pursuit. These qualities have historical foundations. The problem begins when reputation replaces evidence. Princeton University and the University of Chicago have supported broad scholarship examining American political culture and historical memory. Such work reminds you that legends tell us about the people remembering history as well as those who originally lived it. The West becomes especially useful during rapid national change. By the 1890s, the United States is increasingly urban, industrial, connected, and economically powerful. Large cities, corporations, factories, railroads, telephones, and expanding consumer culture reshape daily life. The frontier seems to offer contrast: open land, clear danger, individual action, simple choices, of course. The historical frontier contains railroads, corporations, labor conflicts, government policy, racial hierarchy, commercial agriculture, mining capital, and complicated law. Memory removes the clutter. Traveling shows help carry simplified Western imagery to enormous audiences. Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West productions become particularly influential from the 1880s onward. These performances present dramatic versions of frontier experiences through staged writing, shooting, reenactments, and spectacle. They are entertainment, not neutral historical reconstruction. Yet audiences can experience them as windows into a disappearing world. You sit among spectators as horses thunder across an arena. Dust rises beneath hooves, costumes catch the light, and dramatic action compresses years of conflict into minutes. Everything is visible, everything makes sense. Then you remember the sheriff's office, the cold soup, the wet coat, the unsigned document. Myth has better lighting. Personal memoirs add another layer. As former law officers, soldiers, settlers, ranchers, and other Western participants age, some record their experiences or share stories with writers. These recollections are valuable. They are also memories. Decades can reshape details. While personal reputation influences how individuals describe their own actions. Some witnesses contradict earlier records. Others disagree with one another. No clear agreement survives around certain famous incidents. Modern historians therefore compare memoirs with contemporary documents, rather than accepting every recollection literally. Stanford and other major research institutions preserve collections that make this comparison possible. Letters written near an event may reveal uncertainty later memoirs conveniently forget. Human memory likes completed stories. Life rarely provides them. The mythology of the sheriff also changes violence itself. A real confrontation is frightening, confusing, and dangerous to everyone nearby. A fictional confrontation becomes a test of character. The better man wins. History offers no such guarantee. Skilled officers can die. Careless people can survive. Innocent bystanders can suffer. A suspect may surrender peacefully after days of pursuit, producing an ending far less satisfying to storytellers. So storytellers improve it. Perhaps the distance becomes greater. Perhaps the enemy becomes more dangerous. Perhaps dialogue appears that nobody recorded. Soon repetition gives invention the texture of fact. You hear the echo changing. The sheriff who once depended upon deputies, judges, clerks, witnesses, taxpayers, telegraph operators, ranchers, and ordinary citizens begins standing alone. His community disappears behind him. That may be the greatest distortion. Frontier law is collective. The sheriff's authority exists because institutions and communities support it. Even famous officers cannot arrest counties through personal courage. A badge means something because other people agree that it means something. As the century approaches its end, that agreement becomes increasingly institutional. Permanent courthouses stand where temporary structures once leaned against muddy streets. Railways cross former isolation. Telegraph lines connect distant offices. Growing cities maintain professional police forces. The sheriff remains. But his environment changes. You stand beneath an evening sky while a train approaches the county seat. Its headlamp grows brighter along the rails, and the whistle rolls across fields once crossed mainly by riders. Beside you stands an older man. Perhaps he wore a badge decades earlier. He remembers roads without telegraph lines and jails that barely deserve the name. He remembers frightened prisoners, exhausted pauses, election arguments, and journeys lasting days. The younger people want gunfight stories. I gives them one. It is easier. Later, someone repeats it. The story improves. The sheriff smiles when he hears the new version, because apparently he has become much braver with age. That gentle distortion becomes cultural memory. By 1900, the Wild West sheriff is already becoming something larger than the historical office. The frontier badge enters a modern America increasingly fascinated by the world it believes is disappearing. Yet the sheriff himself has not disappeared. He is adapting. The final years of the century bring stronger institutions, faster communication, growing towns, and new expectations of professional law enforcement. The legend rides backward into memory. The office moves forward. And now, at the edge of a new century, you follow the badge one last time as the Wild West gives way to modern America. The office moves forward, while the landscape around it changes with remarkable speed. You enter the final years before 1900 and find a West increasingly connected by rails, wires, permanent roads, larger towns, and stronger county governments. The old distances remain. They simply matter differently now. A train crosses country that once demanded several exhausting days on horseback. Telegraph messages travel between communities before a mounted fugitive can cover the same ground. Telephones begin appearing across American towns and cities during the late 19th century, creating another way to move information quickly. The sheriff still saddles horses, but the world beside him is accelerating. You feel the contrast one winter morning outside a county courthouse. Dirty snow lies beneath wagon wheels. Frozen fingers struggle with a stiff leather glove, and telegraph wires hum faintly above the street. Inside, the building feels permanent. Brick walls replace rough timber. Records fill cabinets. A secure jail occupies space designed specifically for confinement. Rather than some improvised room, everyone hopes will remain locked. The sheriff has deputies. The court follows established schedules. None of this makes justice perfect. It makes government harder to ignore. By 1890, the United States Census Bureau reports that settlement has become so widely distributed across Western territory that a distinct frontier line can no longer be identified in the earlier sense. 3 years later, historian Frederick Jackson Turner famously uses that development to frame an argument about the frontier's influence upon American history. His interpretation becomes enormously influential. Modern historians have challenged many parts of Turner's framework, particularly its treatment of indigenous peoples and its tendency to simplify Western expansion. Historians still debate what the frontier should mean as a historical concept, and whether any single closing date can describe such a diverse region. Research associated with Stanford University, Yale University, Harvard University, and the University of California has helped produce broader interpretations. The West does not suddenly stop being Western in 1890, nor does conflict vanish because a census category changes. You only notice that older conditions are giving way. Large cities increasingly rely upon municipal police organizations rather than expecting county sheriffs to handle every urban disturbance. Sheriffs remain crucial outside those municipal systems. Their county responsibilities continue. They serve courts, maintain jails, execute warrants, transport prisoners, manage deputies, and enforce legal orders across jurisdictions containing towns, farms, ranches, mining districts, and open country. The badge survives because the county survives. Its mythology, however, begins separating from its daily function. You walk through a growing western town after sunset. Electric lights illuminate several businesses, although darkness still claims quieter streets beyond the commercial center. Railway passengers arrive carrying luggage rather than bedrolls, and hotel clerks expect visitors whose journeys began hundreds of miles away that morning. The town feels less isolated. A fugitive notices this too. Running becomes more complicated when descriptions can move through telegraph networks and officers can travel rapidly by train. Newspapers circulate photographs and detailed accounts with increasing reach. Communication gives law enforcement possibilities earlier sheriffs could hardly imagine. Yet technology creates new vulnerabilities. Railways concentrate valuable property. Banks gather money. Commercial networks allow criminals to move between communities quickly. The sheriff must adapt rather than retire. He also works within expanding legal systems, where professional expectations gradually become stronger. There is still no single national standard governing every sheriff. Local practices vary widely. Some departments remain small and personal, while others develop clearer administrative structures as counties become more populous and wealthy. Training remains far removed from modern professional standards. Experience often comes through work itself. A new deputy learns from older officers, local customs, legal instructions, and the uncomfortable educational method known as making mistakes. Hopefully small ones. The famous revolver remains present. But paperwork continues winning the endurance contest. You enter the office near midday. A deputy reads a telegram concerning a wanted man believed to be traveling toward the county. Another officer checks court documents. Someone brings food to prisoners. A resident waits impatiently to report stolen property. This could almost be an earlier decade. Then the telephone rings in the neighboring office. The century is changing inside the same room. Historical scholarship preserved at Princeton University, Columbia University, and the University of Chicago helps place this transition within the broader growth of American institutions. Government becomes increasingly specialized as populations expand and economies become more complex. The sheriff is no longer expected to represent every imaginable form of authority. Municipal police handle growing urban responsibilities. Federal marshals enforce federal law. Courts develop larger administrative systems. Private detectives and railway agents protect commercial interests. State institutions gradually assume responsibilities that local officers once handled more independently. Jurisdiction becomes a network. The lone lawman becomes less plausible, and always was. Remember the posse riding through freezing rain, the rancher identifying trails, the telegraph operator sending descriptions, and the clerk preparing papers inside the courthouse. The sheriff has never truly stood alone. His strength comes from connections. That remains true as 1900 approaches. There are also profound limits to celebrating this expanding authority. Stronger government does not automatically produce equal justice. Racial discrimination remains deeply embedded within American society and law. Indigenous communities continue suffering the consequences of dispossession. Federal coercion, broken agreements, and policies designed to undermine their independence. Black Westerners encounter discrimination, despite building communities and participating throughout Western economic life. Chinese Americans face exclusion and organized hostility. Mexican-American communities confront political and economic pressures across lands with histories older than American control. The sheriff may protect vulnerable people. He may also enforce systems harming them. Both possibilities belong beneath the badge. This is why the history cannot end with a simple hero. The sheriff represents law. Law reflects the society creating it. Sometimes that society builds institutions capable of restraining violence and protecting communities. Sometimes those institutions reinforce injustice. Most often, the historical record contains both progress and contradiction. You carry that understanding into the final evening of the century. The courthouse settles into exhausted silence after another ordinary day. Cold air slips beneath a doorway. A lamp glows above paper maps, whose county boundaries now seem more substantial than they did 50 years earlier. The sheriff removes his coat. Wet wool hangs near the stove. His hands show the marks of weather, rains, paperwork, and years spent moving between private conflict and public authority. Outside, distant bells carry through the night. A train whistle answers. You remember the mining camps of the 1850s, where settlements could grow faster than courthouses. You remember divided loyalties during the Civil War, returning veterans, cattle towns, weapons regulations, muddy pursuits, citizen pauses, contested elections, famous lawmen, and quiet jail corridors. The journey has never truly been about gunfights. It has been about institutions learning to function across distance, the Wild West. Sheriff begins this story inside communities, where official authority can feel uncertain and painfully thin. By 1900, his office belongs to an increasingly connected system of courts, communications, transportation, and government. The frontier changes. The badge remains. Soon films, novels, radio programs, television, and countless Western stories will transform that badge into one of America's most recognizable symbols. The sheriff will stand alone beneath endless skies. History remembers something quieter. It remembers deputies riding beside him, clerks waiting behind him, judges issuing orders, citizens offering information, prisoners listening behind cold iron, and communities slowly deciding that justice should belong to institutions rather than whoever possesses the strongest hand. The last courthouse lamp burns softly. The century turns, and the sheriff walks forward into modern America. You have traveled across 50 years of Western history, from uncertain mining settlements to counties linked by railways, telegraphs, courts, and stronger institutions. Behind the famous badge, you have found tired horses, wet coats, endless paperwork, frightened prisoners, stubborn voters, ordinary deputies, and communities struggling to decide what justice should mean. Perhaps one moment stayed with you more than the famous names did. Tell us in the comments which part of the sheriff's story you enjoyed most, and where you were listening from tonight. I always love seeing how far these quiet journeys travel. And when you are ready for another long ride into the past, continue with the next history story waiting here on the channel. There are more forgotten lives, difficult nights, and extraordinary ordinary people still waiting beyond the firelight. For now, rest well, sleep peacefully, and thank you for spending this journey with me.